Ever since the deadliest ban list ever in Duel Links a year ago, Crystrons have basically vanished from the competitive environment, only making a return a few months ago with the help of the Mermail engine and Muddragon of the Swamp. I picked up Crystrons right after its first wave of support, and I enjoyed the deck more and more as time went by. I love the complexity of the deck and the large variety of possible plays the deck can provide. For some reason, I cannot find a single Crystron guide video on YouTube, so I'm going to make my own. Crystron is a water machine archetype that focuses on a lot of synchro summoning, both during your turn and your opponent's turn. The archetype is able to generate a ton of card advantage with graveyard effects from cards like Thystvan and Smyger, and is incredibly consistent as Selfnir special summons your monsters directly from the deck every turn. This is why most Crystron players run a 30 cards deck, otherwise it's very easy to run out of resources. Ametrix can be synchro summoned during your opponent's turn to defend against attacks, and Quariongandrax is your boss monster that banishes multiple opponent monsters at once. Crystrons can also synchro summon other generic synchro monsters very easily, making the deck very versatile. Let's take a look at the monsters in the Crystron archetype. Crystron Selfnir is the most important monster that makes the whole deck work. It allows you to basically special summon a Crystron monster from your deck once per turn by discarding a Crystron card. This single monster lets you constantly pump out synchro materials from your deck without wasting your normal summon. The second most important Crystron monster is Thystvan. It can banish itself from the graveyard to search a Crystron monster. Selfnir and Thystvan are the reason why Crystrons are able to generate so much card advantage, because Selfnir special summons Thystvan from the deck, and Thystvan searches Crystron monsters for Selfnir to discard. Smyger is another card advantage generator which searches Crystron spells or traps instead, which makes it a bit less useful than Thystvan, but an extra search is still super powerful. Rosenix has the graveyard effect to special summon a level 1 token, which is often used to synchro summon a level 7 synchro monster by using itself and Coral Dragon as material. The token is especially useful with the Territory of the Sharks skill, which can turn it into a level 4 monster and summon synchro monsters like Quariongandrax easier. Phraseortle is the least useful of the bunch, but it is still very useful to spam more synchro materials on the board to make more synchro summons. A little trick you can use is to special summon Selfnir from your hand with Phraseortle for an extra 2000 attack beta. You can clear the board with synchro monsters like Brionac or Coral Dragon first, search Selfnir with Thystvan, then use Phraseortle's graveyard effect to special summon Selfnir in attack position for lethal damage. This single trick has won me countless games, so it is a good idea to keep this in mind. All Crystron non-tuner monsters except Selfnir have the effect to destroy a face-up card to special summon a Crystron tuner from the deck, but remember to use this effect very carefully, because you can only summon machine-type synchro monsters for the rest of the turn. All 3 Crystron tuners have effects that allow you to synchro summon machine monsters during your opponent's turn. You'll typically want to summon a Ametrix with this effect, but summoning Powered Insectron or Ally of Justice Catasta are viable options as well, depending on the situation. The 3 tuners special summon a monster from either your hand, graveyard, or banish zone, and synchro summons a monster using that monster and itself. C3 is the best of the 3 tuners because it summons from the graveyard, but it is limited to 2. Most decks play one C3 alongside one Crystron Impact, but I sometimes play none and use Ryan instead. Ryan is much more sustainable in the long run than the other 2 tuners, because it shuffles itself to your deck after using its effect, allowing you to summon it again. It is much harder to summon a Ametrix with Ryan's effect, but you can summon Powered Insectron instead and survive for a turn. It is also limited to 2. So many Crystron decks don't use Ryan at all and use C3 instead. Quan summons from your hand, which is arguably the worst of the 3 tuners, but it is the only tuner that is not limited to 2, so players usually use 2 or 3 copies of it. A very useful combo that I like to use with Quan is to synchro summon a Metrix using itself and Witch of the Black Forest from your hand in your opponent's turn, because that will actually trigger Witch of the Black Forest's effect to search basically any monster from your deck. There are exactly two Crystron traps, Crystron Entry and Crystron Impact. Crystron Entry is very situational to activate and is usually used as a discard cost for Selfnir. Its graveyard effect can be quite useful. It changes the level of a Crystron monster by sending a Crystron monster from your deck to the graveyard. You can use it to modify your monster's level to synchro summon easier, and send cards like Thystvan to the graveyard for more card advantage. This effect is especially useful when used on a Rosenix token to increase its level. On the other hand, Crystron Impact is a much more powerful trap. It special summons a banished Crystron monster, and turns all your opponent monsters' defense to 0. It pairs well with the Metrix, allowing you to beat over any monster by battle. The free summon also helps you to synchro summon more monsters. Its graveyard effect negates an effect that targets your Crystron monsters, which is very useful to prevent your opponent from disrupting your combos. Unfortunately it is limited to 2, so some versions of Crystron decks can't use it. As 2 of the 3 Crystron tuners are limited to 2, Crystron decks usually play other tuners outside the archetype. Fishborg Launcher is a popular choice in Territory of the Sharks decks, as it revives itself from the graveyard over and over again. Decks that don't use Territory of the Sharks commonly use Psychic Wielder. It special summons itself when you have a level 3 monster, which synergizes very well with Thystvan and Smyger and lets you summon level 6 synchro monsters like Coral Dragon and Brionac a lot easier. Junk Synchron is another viable choice that I like to use. It summons a level 2 Warlow monster from your graveyard, which makes summoning Quariongandrax significantly easier. There are so many good generic synchro monsters for the deck to choose. Ametrix and Quariongandrax are 2 great synchro monsters of the archetype. Players usually play 1 to 2 Ametrix and 1 Quariongandrax, but I would sometimes not use Quariongandrax if there is not enough extra deck space, because it is quite hard to summon in comparison. Coral Dragon and Brionac are excellent level 6 generic synchro monsters which the deck can easily summon, and the card advantage generated by the Crystron engine can fuel their discard cost. They are also water monsters, which means they can be used with the skill Territory of the Sharks. Speaking of Territory of the Sharks, Gungnir is a popular choice in those decks because of its water attribute and discard cost. It can also be summoned using Coral Dragon and a Rosenix token, which gives you extra card destruction and a free draw. In other Crystron decks that don't use that skill, Black Rose Dragon is one of the most essential synchro monsters to use. Its board wipe effect is excellent against large amounts of back row or monsters that cannot be targeted. Powered Insectron can be summoned in your opponent's turn using Ryan's effect as an alternative to Ametrix and help you survive your opponent's turn. Samurai Destroyer is a powerful synchro monster in general that can shut down opponent effects when it battles, making it especially effective against decks like Melodious. It also special summons a machine monster when it leaves the field by an opponent's card effect, which you can choose to special summon itself. A level 7 synchro monster that I really like to use is Shiranui Squire Saga. You summon it using Coral Dragon and a Rosenix token, get a free draw from Coral Dragon's effect, and destroy an extra monster without targeting by banishing Coral Dragon from your graveyard. It is particularly useful against untargetable monsters like Lunar Lightsaber Dancer. You will need to choose what synchro monster to summon depending on the situation. The 2 best offensive synchro monsters are Coral Dragon and Brionac. Coral Dragon is often the best choice, as it is useful to destroy monsters or back row, and lets you draw a card when it is sent from the field to the graveyard, which means you can use it as a synchro material later on and get a free card. Brionac is less useful against back row because your opponent can just set them back next turn, but it is very effective against extra deck monsters or monsters with graveyard effects, or monsters that cannot be destroyed with card effects like Bloom Diva. You can also return multiple cards to the hand with Brionac's effect. Quariongandrax is also powerful, but it is harder to summon. In many cases, summoning Coral Dragon or Brionac would be enough to deal with your opponent anyway. Let's look at the common compositions of Crystron decks. The most common and competitive version currently uses Territory of the Sharks and the Mermail engine. Mermail Abyspike can search your level 3 Crystron monsters, or more importantly, King of the Swamp. It lets the deck search Polymerization easily and fusion summon Mudragon of the Swamp to provide target protection. Polymerization helps send Crystron monsters like Sulfnir and Istvan from the hand to the graveyard, and King of the Swamp is a level 3 monster that can be revived by C-Tree to synchro summon a Matrix. Mudragon is the main reason this version of Crystrons sees so much more competitive success than other versions, because target protection is very useful against many meta decks. The version I like to play uses Genex Sundine as a starter to send Istvan or Sulfnir to the graveyard straight from your deck. Witch of the Black Forest can be summoned by Quanta Synchro Summon a Matrix while triggering its graveyard effect to search any monster with 1500 defense or lower. Sulfnir or cards like Junk Synchron or Psychic Wielder can be searched with this effect to make more explosive combo plays in the next turn. This version of Crystrons is very fun to play and I think more people should know about this playstyle. Some other versions use the Thunder Dragon engine, some use it with Mark of the Dragonhead or Shooting Star Road, and some play a boring heavy trap version which I don't recommend playing at all. The possibilities of Crystrons are truly endless. Let's go over how to play the deck. There are 3 main steps for playing Crystrons. Get Sulfnir, summon Tuner, and Wombo combo next turn. Your first objective is to send Crystron Sulfnir to the graveyard or add it to your hand. Because that is the key card for you to generate an absurd amount of card advantage. Before the ban list, Scrap Recycler and Genex Sundine were commonly used to send Sulfnir to the graveyard directly from your deck. Currently, Istvan is your main way of searching Sulfnir, and many players use Mermail Abyspike to search for Istvan. Beautiful Princess and Mermail Abystias are also great starters to search for Mermail Abyspike. Some players use general mill cards like Cupid Valiant Guard Trooper to mill Istvan or Sulfnir from the deck, but they are a bit luck dependent. After that, your typical first turn play is to summon a Crystron Tuner, so you can summon a Matrix or Powered Insectron during your opponent's turn to protect yourself. Use Sulfnir to special summon a non-tuner Crystron monster, then activate its effect to destroy itself and special summon a Crystron Tuner from the deck. C-Tree is the most common choice. But you can summon Ryan instead if you have Powered Insectron in your extra deck, or Quan if you have a monster in your hand to synchro summon with. If you're summoning C-Tree, make sure you have a level 3 monster in your graveyard for you to synchro summon a Matrix in your opponent's turn. What you do during your next turn greatly depends on what cards are in your hand and what your opponent is playing. Your general objective is to spam synchro materials with Sulfnir's effect and the monsters in your hand to synchro summon monsters that counter whatever your opponent has on their board. It is worth noting that the token that Crystron Rosenix generates can be very useful for an extra synchro summoning material, especially if you're using the Territory of the Sharks skill. Crazy Autel can sometimes be useful to special summon an extra copy of Sulfnir from your hand in attack position for an extra 2000 attack beta. It is not possible for me to explain every scenario and combo plays you can make during your second turn because there are just too many. Just practice the deck more and you'll eventually get the hang of it. As versatile and fun Crystrons may be, it is by no means perfect. Let's have a look at how Crystrons can be countered. The deck's biggest problem is disruption. Monsters like Photon Strike Boonza, Steel Swarm Roach, Digital Bug Rhino's Bus, That Gaia Fusion Monster, Abyss Dweller, and Harpy Lady are common extra deck monsters that are a huge problem for Crystrons, because Crystrons rely heavily on using monsters to synchro summon. Common staple back row can also stop your combo from working. Cards that stop graveyard effects or banish cards from your graveyard is also extremely problematic, making decks like Blue Eyes, Atlantean Dweller, Melodious, and Evil Eye, as well as cards like Necrovalley, a solid counter against Crystrons. As you can probably tell, Crystrons aren't in a very good position currently, as most meta decks have counters against the archetype. Crystrons are much less of a threat than a year ago, and I don't think they deserve such a harsh ban list restriction anymore. To solve these problems and compete with the meta, Crystron decks typically run a few tech cards. Mystical Space Typhoon or Cosmic Cyclone are common back row removal choices for Crystron decks that don't use Mudragon of the Swamp. Forbidden Chalice or Book of Moon are used to counter opponent monsters that can disrupt your combos. Lightning Vortex can discard your Crystrons for card advantage while wiping all of your opponent's monsters. Powerful Rebirth acts as a combo extender to make more explosive synchro plays, and Creature Seizure allows you to steal your opponent's monster while giving them a Rosenix token in attack position. Overall, Crystrons had a long history of being a competitive deck since its release, but after harsh ban lists and meta shifting, it is now a balanced, if not underpowered deck which only sees little competitive play currently. The engines, tech cards, and generic synchro monsters may make Crystrons look expensive, but the core Crystron cards are actually fairly cheap, all coming from one main box and one mini box. The synchro monsters in the Cybernetic Rebellion box are also sufficient to make a functional Crystron deck. If you like using your brain and make versatile wombo combos, I highly suggest trying Crystrons out. The rest of this video will be gameplay of me using the deck for you to get a rough idea on how to play it, but I still suggest playtesting this deck yourself to learn the combos more thoroughly. Thanks for watching.